All right. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Olson. I'm one of the co-founders here at LSAT Demon. How many people are attending a class for the first time? You've never been to a Demon live class. Okay. So maybe based on my very informal, non-scientific study, it looks like half of you, maybe the other half of you have attended a class before or are actually a live subscriber. But in any case, today we are going to do a reading comp passage. And then if we have time, we're going to do logical reasoning. I suspect that we will. Before we jump in, I do want to talk about reading comp a little bit. I don't know how familiar all of you are with our approach. The Demon approach to the LSAT is basically the test is logical. It's understandable. You can figure it out. Trying to approach the test through gimmicks, shortcuts, tricks like that can be actually counterproductive because it can distract you from the real test that's going on, and that is your ability to understand what is written on the page. If you can understand what the test has given you, it's very, very likely that you will get the correct answer. In almost all cases, when we're trying to explain why a wrong answer is wrong or why a correct answer is correct, it's a matter of unpacking what was said in the passage, right? Or what was said in the question or the answers. And once you understand it, the logic of it makes total sense. It's not like people are usually arguing against the logic of things. They're usually arguing against, or they're arguing with someone else about what the meaning of the sentence was. And so if you can slow down and focus on what was said and grasp the meaning, so much of this test is going to become very easy and make 100% sense to you. Okay. So in any case, today we're going to do a reading comp passage. And in that spirit, I want to make it clear that the best way to get good at reading comprehension is to slow down and understand what you're reading. Now, that might sound simple and obvious, but people don't do it, right? If you do reading comp now and you spend most of your time reading the questions and answering the questions as opposed to reading the passage, you're probably doing it wrong. You're probably not spending enough time trying to understand the passage. Just as a general rule of thumb, not that you should keep track of this at all, because focusing on time is itself a distraction. I spend about half the time reading the passage and about half the time answering the questions, right? That is not normal from my observations of people in class when they first start studying for the LSAT. They read the passage in about 1 to 2 minutes, and then they spend anywhere from 8 to 12 answering the questions, right? And a lot of that is because they don't understand fully what they read. They're so anxious to get into the questions that they have a vague understanding of the passage and then fail to figure out the answer. And then they have to go back and actually end up rereading the passage or rereading the question multiple times. Yeah. Yeah, Connor, you said half of the time of the total 35-minute section. Yeah. So the 35-minute section is going to have 4 passages, right? So you don't need to worry about finishing the section at first. Just think about each individual passage. If a passage ends up taking me 10 minutes, I'm not saying it should. Maybe a passage should take you the whole 35 minutes. But if a passage took me 10 minutes, generally speaking, about half that time or 5 minutes, I spend actually reading the passage. Again, I don't want to talk about time too much because I don't want you to sit there looking at your clock, asking yourself, oh, did I spend half the time reading the passage? No, I don't care. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that most people rush through the passage too quickly And then over time, as they get better and better at reading comp, they actually end up spending more time reading the passage, and that makes them go exponentially faster through the questions and the answers. Okay. All right. So anyways, how do you do that? What does that look like in practice? Well, what actually happens is these passages are made up of sentences. Anyone know how many sentences are in one passage typically? Okay. Cassandra says 15. Yeah, exactly. There's about 15 to 16 sentences. That's it, right? That's not very many. And what we're doing is we're reading the first sentence, we're making sure we understand it, and then we're going on to the next sentence. What a lot of people do is they read too quickly. They have a vague sense of what the first sentence is saying, and then they just plow into the second, and then they plow into the third. And that's not how I do reading comp, and that's not how I would suggest that you do reading comp. You read the first sentence. If you don't understand it, you reread it, right? Now, there are some exceptions. Maybe you read it and you're like, wow, I don't know where the author is going with this. And you might need the next sentence to give you a little more context, but that is not the rule. That's not the norm, yet that's what a lot of people do. They just plow through the passage, right? What else is helpful in trying to understand? Well, one way to think about this is imagine that you're going to become an attorney someday, and you're going to be in a law firm, maybe, right? And you're a new associate, and the partner comes to you and says, hey, can you read this email or this document or this memo from one of our clients and tell me what it's about? What do I need to know about this document? And you're not going to read that quickly, and you're not going to read it lightly. And as you read it, you're going to try to understand, like, what's the main point? What is the main thing I need to take away from this document? Why did the client email us about this whatever issue, right? Like, what was the purpose behind this email? And then when you're done, when the partner comes back, you're going to be able to look at him or her and say, hey, look, this is the problem here. This is the problem. And here are the 2 reasons why it's a problem, or whatever, right? That's what you need to be able to do with these passages. You need to be able to read them and say, hey, look, this is why this author was saying something. And this is why the author thinks it's important. So one question you can have in the back of your mind as you're reading all of these passages is, why are you, the author of this usually god-awful passage, why are you wasting my time? What is it that is so important to you that you need to get conveyed, right? And if you keep coming back to that idea, why are you wasting my time? Then you're much more likely to walk away from the passage with a clear understanding of the author's main point, or why the author sat down to write this. And if you have that clear understanding in your own words, then all the questions, even though they're not all main point questions, are going to become much easier, because they all touch on the main point to some degree or another. Even questions that ask you, hey, what do the opponents of some theory think? Well, your understanding of the opponent's view is colored by your understanding of the author's main point, or the author's view, right? Like, you can understand what the opponents believe precisely because you also understand what the author believes or the proponents believe, right? So the main thing you want to walk away from when you leave this passage is a solid understanding of the author's main point. Okay? Like, okay, I get why you wrote this. This is what you thought. And you're saying that in your own words. A lot of times when people finish these passages, and I'm tutoring them one-on-one, or we're in a class setting, and I say, hey, what was the main point? and they start to go back to the passage. They look back at the passage and they start scanning and rereading things. To me, that signals that they weren't engaged enough and weren't trying to process what the author was saying as they were reading it. Right? They were just kind of going through the motions of reading as opposed to really trying to, oh, okay, let's have a conversation. And here's what I think you're trying to say. And today I'm going to try to model that. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you read the reading comp passage that we're doing in class to yourself. Answer the questions as best you can. Some of you may or may not finish. That's okay. The goal here isn't to finish. The goal is to understand the passage and then answer as many questions as you get to perfectly, right? Because you understood the passage so well. And then what I will do is I will read the passage as if I were taking the test and show you the sort of reactions I have as I read each sentence, right? Oh, here's the sentence I read. Here's what I think it's saying. What do I think about that? Do I think that's dumb? Do I think that makes sense? And then where do I think the author is likely going with this sentence? Where do I think the author is going to take me? And then we continue reading. And as I continue reading, observing how I was either right or wrong, not that it's about being right or wrong, it's more about that conversation that you're having with the author so that you know you're on the same page as the author. Because if you're in line with the author, if you're reading the passage and you're like, yeah, I see what you're saying, I get it, then the LSAT can ask you whatever question it wants and you can predict an answer, and 95% of the time your prediction is going to be very, very close to whatever answer they end up giving you. All right. I know I've just monologued for what? Oh, geez, 10 minutes. Questions? Is any of this confusing? Is the goal not clear?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for
it. So I've used other services, and in those services, they put a lot of emphasis on making really tight summaries, like writing down. How much stock do you put in balancing, compartmentalizing something in your head versus trying to write it down and make a accurate summary?
Excellent. Thanks, Davis. I don't write anything down. In fact, I feel like it's, best case scenario, it's just sort of a waste of time. Worst case scenario, I think it becomes an excuse to not really understand. Because if you really understand what is being said, you don't need to write it down and you don't need the help to memorize. Right? Like if you read a sentence and someone says, you get what they're saying, you don't need to remember the exact words because the idea is now in your head. Like if I asked you to recall everything I just told you over the last 10 minutes, you would struggle probably immensely, right? But if I asked you, hey, what was my point? And you had that point in your head, in your own words, you just recall that and move forward, right? And that's what I want to get with this passage. And so I'm especially concerned when people write and then that becomes an excuse for not understanding. Like, oh, well, I wrote it down. But yeah, but do you get it? What is the author trying to say about this scientific theory or whatnot? Harvey, question.
Yes, thanks. I was listening to one of the podcasts recently where I don't remember if it was you or Nathan that kind of bashed the highlighting. I was wondering though if you believe that there is some benefit to not really highlighting, but reverse highlighting, and just taking out extra words that you know that I know for sure have nothing to do with what I have to take out of it.
Well, I know that for some people who have reading challenges or reading specific, learning differences and struggle with reading, for whatever reason, highlighting can be helpful. But I think for most people, highlighting again is just sort of a distraction. This idea of highlighting things that you know are not important, is that what it's a little hard to hear you, but
I'm sorry, I'm just not at my normal desk, so I don't really have my computer.
no worries, no worries. I mean, I don't do it. I wouldn't encourage people to do that. I'm struggling to see the value in highlighting things that aren't important. It's also hard to decide what is important in the moment until you step back and understand the big picture of the passage. So even deciding what is or isn't important seems like a challenge itself. So yeah, I would discourage it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, MN, question.
Hey Ben, yeah, good question. So I already used the live subscription for around 4 months. Now I'm back again to take the test because apparently not many schools have been accepting my application.
Yeah,
So
okay.
yeah, I've talked to one of the schools. They said, yeah, you're probably gonna have to retake it again. So I'm taking it April. So I was wondering, should I take live subscription? Should I get back again to live subscription, or should I just take more tests? What would you suggest, Ben?
Well, I don't know about more tests. I would say more time sections and drilling for sure. Whether or not you do live really depends on whether or not you benefit more from, like, do you find yourself doing more LSAT studying because you're in class, because you can ask questions? If not, then you don't need live. If you do, if you find that, hey, look, I can ask a question immediately and get my answer answered or my question answered, then yeah, I think it's worth the investment than just giving the all the money that's on the line, right, for applying and scholarships. Yeah.
I know, yeah, I've got back again to basic, and yeah, I'm going through all the questions again, logical reasoning and all that. But yeah, apparently I'm probably gonna need to take the test again. So yeah,
Okay. Well,
wish me luck.
yeah, good luck. I hope you're not applying in April. You're applying next cycle?
Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, so I was applying to Stetson, and he said, "Hey, just apply in April." And yeah, what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't do it. So
Okay.
the reason they want you is they know that all these other offers have been given out, and schools that are accepting people still in April and May and June, they're doing so because they're not as competitive, right? So as soon as you get a higher LSAT score and then you reapply at the beginning of the cycle, you're going to be wanted by more schools than just that one. So they want you to apply then and get out of the pool, get out of the competition. So I would wait, but keep us posted. Patrice, question.
Yeah, Ben. I've been doing all of the things on your Demon program on and off for about 8 months. I've done the drilling. I've done like other things. I have not focused, like 100%. I'm an older student going back and applying, and so I have a family, I have a job, I have things in the way. But the biggest like obstacle I have is speed. So I'm getting them all in the reading comp and the games and everything. I'm getting them a little bit better now. The logical reasoning has really picked up because I've started to dissect, like what I'm reading as a result of everything you've said. So I'm definitely seeing scores increasing. On the reading comp, I actually do well. I just am not very fast. And so I don't get very far. I get to question 15 and time's done.
And of the 15 you do, how many do you get correct?
Or maybe 12.
Okay. So you said something at the beginning there that a lot of people say and a lot of people feel very strongly. So it's not surprising that you feel that way, but you said that your main problem is speed. Yeah. And I would challenge you to say, wait a sec, hold on. You're doing 15 questions. You're getting 12 of those correct. That's great. That's good. I'm glad you're doing that. But you still have more questions you can get right
Yes.
in those 15 before you even worry about question 16.
Okay.
And the magic here is that if you can get to a point where you're getting 14 or 15 out of 15, it shows a level of understanding which is going to automatically translate into speed. I mean,
Okay.
we'll try to do it. Well, it will just happen today, I'm sure. As we're going through some of the questions, some of the wrong answers are going to be obviously wrong 2 or 3 words into the answer. And why are they obviously wrong? Because we so clearly understand the passage. So we understand the passage 100%. We start reading the answer choice and we're like, no, that's crazy. The author hated this theory or whatever, right? And then we're moving on from that answer while 50%, 60%, 70% of the other test takers are reading that answer in full. And I've seen this in dramatic fashion. Actually, there's this logical reasoning question I remember where I got rid of it after the 3rd word because it said all and only those, all and only those. And I was like, whoa, we're not, that creates this double condition, which we don't need to get into. But I read that and I was like, we don't have enough. Like the original argument didn't have that. And so I moved on from that answer choice. And when I was done explaining that question, everybody's like, wait. The most tempting wrong answer was the one you talked about for 3 words. And it's like, that's an answer choice where everybody read the entire answer choice. They then debated it. They debated it with the correct answer. That's what consumed all their time.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I got rid of it in 3 words and didn't even like think twice. It's not even like I got sucked into this rabbit hole of like, whoa, man, I guess that could be kind of close. That's where the time saving happens. And it can happen quite dramatically. So once your understanding gets to 14 or 15 out of 15, you're going to see yourself like, wow, I just did that section and I got to 18 questions. Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Okay. So
You know?
speeding up is a result of being able to pick out the wrong answers quicker. And that's
Yes,
it's just
exactly.
practice. And I mean, that's basically practice and understanding.
Practice and review, right? Like people review questions like, yeah, I kind of see why D is correct. No, not kinda. Like explain it to your friend or to someone else who's struggling with that question, right?
Okay.
Clearly in a way that they understand.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so let's take one more question just because I want to jump into this passage. Ada.
Yeah, so hi, I only have one technical issue. So my problem is because of the screen. So I always have headache. I have tried to take some tests in the ProCord test, and my problem is that because of the screen, I cannot focus. I have headache. So is there an option to do the exam on the paper?
Yes, you can do it on paper. You have to apply for accommodations and then ask for a
Okay.
paper-based test. I guess I don't know how
Okay.
current that advice is, but I feel like I heard about a paper test even just like last year. I don't know.
I don't know if anybody else is having the same issue. Like for me, the screen is a huge problem. I don't know if you have heard this before from others.
I haven't heard it super often, but yeah, it is certainly a problem for some people. Okay. Yeah. So paper-based test is
Okay.
still an option. Yeah. Apply for that. You have to apply for accommodations before the test. So, yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So sorry if there are more questions. I'm happy to take them after, even stay after if that's necessary. Let's go ahead and jump in by doing the first passage on the syllabus, which is, what is that? Actually, I don't even have the syllabus. Sorry. Okay, this is test 73, passage 2, Cameron's Pictures. So go ahead and click on that link, do that reading comp passage now. I'll give you about 10, 12 minutes. When you're done, hit the polls and quizzes button at the bottom of Zoom and tell me which questions you want to go over and what you thought of the passage. That will help me know what to focus on as we go over it together. Sound good? Good luck. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so that was 15 minutes. It looks like not quite most of us have finished it yet, but I thought maybe we should cut you off there so that I can go into the passage. I'm sure all of you have read it by now, even if you didn't finish all apparently 8 questions. So I apologize for cutting you off. Thanks for filling out the poll. It looks like most of you did enjoy the passage. Although now that some of you are filling out the poll, the number of no's is going up. Maybe that's because if you were still working on it at this point, you didn't like it. That's cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this passage to you. You get to sit back and relax. And but I hope you get something out of how I'm engaging with this passage so that you can get that sense for yourself. As I read it, I will take longer, obviously, than I would if I were to just read it in my head, but that's because I'm trying to explain to you what I'm also thinking as I read it. Sound good? Let's jump in. This is Test 73, Passage 2. It has this opening introduction text, right, that's italicized. There's a fair number of test takers who will immediately skip that mistake. Don't skip that. I hope none of you skipped it today. But even if you read it, a lot of people won't even read it that carefully. They'll just say, okay, from a critical discussion of the work of Victorian photographer Julia Margaret Cameron. There's not a lot there, but there still is something there. First of all, before going into this passage, I know I'm going to be reading about a photographer, which probably means I'm going to be reading about photography. And the Victorian part actually is throwing me off a little bit here. When I think of Victorian, I think of the late 1800s. I guess they had cameras back then. I mean, I know there are old photos, but I'm trying to think about when photography was invented. But the point here is that I'm going to be reading a passage about old photos, or old, at least an old photographer. Sound good? What Cameron, and that's the photographer, called her fancy subject pictures. I don't know what fancy subject pictures are, but we have a dash here, which means the LSAT's going to define them. Photographs in which 2 or more costumed sitters enacted under Cameron's direction scenes from the Bible, mythology, Shakespeare, or Tennyson. Oh, okay. So I guess they're fancy in the sense that they're these sort of renowned things, right? The Bible, Shakespeare, these are, what is it like? It's almost like high society things from that time period, things that people respected or admired. So her pictures involve these enactments from the Bible. Okay. They bear unmistakable traces of the often comical conditions under which they were taken. Okay, so there's something funny about these photos. They are scenes from the Bible, but they're funny. They're scenes from Shakespeare, but they're funny. In many respects, they have more connection to the family album pictures of recalcitrant relatives who have been herded together for the obligatory group picture than they do to the masterpieces of Western painting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I guess they are photos, and they're having people come together, and they don't want to, and they dress up, right? Scenes from the Bible, costumed sitters, that's what they said. So people are dressing up like they're from a scene from the Bible, and there's something awkward about these photos. Okay, they're not like masterpieces of Western painting. So Western paintings obviously would have scenes from the Bible that appear to be masterpieces, right? They're great. They're great paintings, but something's wrong with these photos. In Raphael and Giotto, there are no infant Christs whose faces are blurred because they moved. Okay, I guess that's kind of funny. The baby's face is blurred. Or who are looking at the viewer with frank hatred. Okay, the baby's like, what the fuck am I doing here? I don't want to be here. Yeah, that is kind of funny. Okay. So Raphael and Giotto are like, they are painters, right? Who painted masterpieces. These photos aren't like that at all. In fact, they're funny because they're flawed. These traces, of course, are what give the photographs their life and charm. All right, that's important. Okay, I hope we noticed this sentence. The author here is saying that these photographs are great. They have life and charm because of these errors, right? These mistakes, these comical mistakes, or these comical situations, I guess. I want to know what the author thinks. And the author thinks that these photos are good. If Cameron had succeeded in her project of making seamless works of illustrative art, her work would be among the curiosities of Victorian photography. Okay, so if she had actually done a good job and not made these mistakes, not had babies who look like they hated you, and not had babies whose faces are blurred, then we would have forgotten about these works, actually. If she had been successful, we would have forgotten about them. Like Oscar Gustav's Rylander's extravagantly awful The Two Ways of Life. Okay, so apparently there's some Victorian photography called The Two Ways of Life, or a photo called The Two Ways of Life that's awful. So it would have been like that. Her work would have been awful if she had succeeded. If she had done a good job, it would have been awful. Rather than among its most vital images. Okay, again, the author is saying that the author likes this work, likes these photos, and is saying that her work is among the most vital images. Okay, I'm not sure why these mistakes make it so amazing, but they're funny, I guess. They're funny. That's what she likes about them. All right, so far so good. Let's keep going. It is precisely the camera's realism, its stubborn obsession with the surface of things. All right, the camera is obsessed with getting everything exactly accurate, that has given Cameron's theatricality and artificiality its atmosphere of truth. Okay, I have to think about that for a half second. That's a lot of words to throw together. But basically, the camera is very realistic. It captures everything as it actually is. And even though Cameron is trying to create a theater, right? Trying to recreate these scenes from the Bible or from Shakespeare. And because she's using a camera, that is actually giving it some truth. I guess that's it. It is the truth of the sitting rather than the fiction which all the dressing up was in aid of that wafts out of these wonderful and strange, not quite in focus photographs. Okay, again, the author is saying that these photographs are wonderful. So clearly the author likes the photographs. And the truth is actually seeing the person sitting there dressed up, not the fiction that Cameron is trying to create. So Cameron is trying to create a scene from the Bible, but what actually comes out of that is the person sitting there all dressed up in their costume. And that's wonderful and strange. And apparently these photographs are not in focus. Okay. They are what they are. Pictures of housemaids and nieces and husbands and village children who are dressed up as Mary Madonnas and infant Jesuses and John the Baptists and Lancelots and Guinevere's. How do you say her name? Guinevere. Guinevere's, and trying desperately hard to sit still. Okay. trying desperately hard to sit still. So these people, that's why the baby was mad, right? These pictures take a long time to take. And really that's what we're seeing, these people who are dressed up. Wow. And we're not seeing baby Jesus. We're seeing a baby who's pissed off. The way each sitter endures his or her ordeal is the collective action of the photograph, its plot, so to speak. So the real plot or the real story in these pictures is what's actually happening. This person who's struggling to sit there, not the narrative that Cameron is trying to recreate from the Bible or Shakespeare. When we look at the narrative painting, we can suspend our disbelief. When we look at a narrative photograph, we can't. Okay, so I'm not even sure, like when I say, I actually just used the word narrative. I guess narrative painting is the same thing. It's a painting of the Bible. So it's a painting of a story. It's a painting of something that was happening. In that case, we can suspend our disbelief. We can actually believe. We can actually believe what we're seeing. Where when we look at a narrative photograph, we can't. We can't. We have to see it for what it is. These people sitting there dressed up. We are always aware of the photograph's doubleness of each figure's imaginary and real personas. Yeah. So we see the person as Mary Madonna, but we also see the person as a housemaid or whatever. Theater can transcend its doubleness, can make us believe for at least some of the time that we are seeing only Lear or Medea. Still, photographs of theatrical scenes can never escape being pictures of actors. Wow, so no matter what, you're going to see the underlying person. You're going to see the real person sitting there, not the person they're pretending to be. What gives Cameron's pictures of actors their special quality? Okay, again, the author says they have special quality. That's a good thing. The author likes these pictures. If you missed that, you're not reading carefully enough, right? What gives these pictures their special quality? What gives them their special quality? Their status as treasures of photography of an unfathomably peculiar sort. Okay, they're really peculiar, I guess so. Is what gives them their special quality? It's their singular combination of amateurism and artistry. Okay, so there's two things going on. Well, there's a couple things going on here. One, did you all notice the word singular? I don't know if that will be tested, but when someone says that something is singular, they're saying that it doesn't happen anywhere else, right? So also the author just said unfathomably peculiar. So there's something unique about these photos, according to the author. What is that? It's the fact that it combines amateurism with artistry. So, okay. In The Passing of Arthur, for example, examples, by the way, are always what? Does anyone know what examples always are? You should know this for logical reasoning and for reading comp. They're always used for some purpose.
Evidence to support the conclusion.
Yep. They're always used as evidence to support a conclusion that was already said. So, for example, means I'm going to read an example and it's going to be used to support something I just read. So what did we just read? We read that these pictures are awesome because they combine amateurism and artistry. Oh, well, apparently that's going to happen here. In The Passing of Arthur, for example, the mast and oar of the makeshift boat representing a royal barge are obviously broomsticks. And the water is white muslin drapery. Okay, so that's maybe the amateur part. But these details are insignificant. For once, the homely truth of the sitting gives right of place. Gives right of place? I don't know what that means. The homely truth of the sitting gives right of place to the romantic fantasy of its director. I don't fully understand that sentence. Homely truth is like the plain truth. So these people who are sitting here and they have these silly props, that the truth of that gives right of place, makes room for the author's romantic fantasy. I don't really understand that. But the picture, a night scene, is magical and mysterious. Okay, so that's probably the artistry part. Remember, this example was to show that these photos have amateurism and artistry. And so this photo, the passing of Arthur, had these silly broomsticks, but also was magical and mysterious. I don't know why, though. The author doesn't explain why it's magical or mysterious. But anyways, while Cameron's fancy subject pictures have been compared to poor amateur theatricals, okay, so some other people have said, look, they suck. They're like poor amateur works. The passing of Arthur puts one in the mind of good amateur theatricals one has seen and recalls with shameless delight. What the hell? So, does anyone here remember good amateur theatricals that you have seen and recall with shameless delight? You're just like, oh yeah, that was so great. Even though it was amateur. I mean, that's strange, but the point here is that the author doesn't think it's poor. The author thinks it's good. It's a good amateur theatrical. All right, whatever. The main point here is that this person's work is successful because it has these mistakes or these funny things about the photographs that revealed the truth of the situation, and that's amateurish. But the work is also apparently artistic or artsy or something. There's something nice about it. And those two things together make these photographs good or great. Otherwise, they would have just been forgotten and maybe even awful, like that other photograph we heard about earlier. Sound good? So notice what I'm doing here. I'm recapping the point of the passage without referring to the passage itself. I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, what did I just learn? I just learned that this author clearly likes these photographs. They're weird. They have these odd mistakes. They seem awkward and funny, but also artistic. And that's what this author likes about them. Other people think they're just shit. But okay, great. That's the main point. If you can't articulate the main point in your own words when you're done reading the passage, you need to stop and think. If you have to scan back over to remind yourself what was discussed, not that I'm advocating scanning reading, but maybe you need to look back and remind yourself what was talked about first, what was talked about second, what was talked about third, so that you can then put the pieces together and formulate the main point in your own words. Then do it, because that work is going to pay off in spades. Every question you come to is likely to benefit from the effort you put in to formulating that main point in your own words, not just arbitrarily picking some sentence and saying, oh yeah, that seems like the main point. No, pull it all together and figure it out yourself. Hey, it's work, but it pays off big time. And there's more psychological stuff going on here, by the way. When you pull it together, you're pulling that information from what's in your head. You put information in and now you're pulling it back out. And that process is itself formative. It helps you get a clearer picture of what you just read. There's a difference between just reading this and answering questions about it than reading it, trying to articulate it yourself. That articulation process makes your understanding of what you've taken in even better. Okay. So then that's going to pay off as you go through the questions. Any questions about the passage before we go into the answers? They should go faster. Okay. Let's go to question 8. Almost certainly going to be a main point question. It says, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main point of the passage? If you've done your job correctly, you already have identified the main point. If you need to remind yourself, you can and should hear before you look at the answers. My prediction was, hey, these photographs are good. They're cool. They're nice. They're wonderful. Why? Because they have these oddities about them and they're artistic at the same time. So they're amateurish and artistic. That's what makes them great. Let's see what these answers say. The wrong answers in a main point question, by the way, tend to either be too narrow. They're not the main point. They're just some random thing that was mentioned in the passage, or they are factually inaccurate. They were never, some part of that answer was never said. That's going to kill that answer. Okay. Anyways, A, the circumstances under which Cameron's fancy subject pictures were taken render them unintentionally comical. I think that's true. The sitting of the photos made them funny. And I don't think she intended them to be funny. I think she was trying to do a good job, but she failed. That's not the main point, though. The main point isn't, oh, by the way, why were they funny? It was, why were they good, right? So B, A is wrong. B, the peculiar charm of Cameron's fancy subject pictures derives from the viewer's simultaneous awareness of the fictional scene portrayed and the circumstances of its portrayal. Okay, that's the LSAT's wordy way of saying of its artistry and its amateurism, right? So its artistry and its amateurism is why these pictures have charm. That's literally a word that the author used to describe these photos. That sounds like a pretty good answer. Let's go through the remaining 3 quickly. I always do, because maybe there's something better and I need to come back and see what I'm missing in B, but B sounds good right now. Answer choice C, the implicit claim of Cameron's fancy subject pictures to comparison, the implicit claim of her photos. I don't remember the author talking about some implicit as opposed to some explicit claim of the photos. I already like B, so my standard for each remaining answer choice has gone up, right? Like if there's anything I don't like about it, I'm moving on because B is already pretty good, or actually very good. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading. D, the most successful. I hate that too. Do we ever talk about which photos were more successful than others, or whether she was more successful than other photographers? No, wrong. E, the interest of Cameron's fancy subject pictures consists in what they tell us about the sitters and not in the imaginary scenes they portray. Okay, this started off good because the interest or the nice things about her photos do consist in what they tell us about the sitters, the people who are being photographed. But the last part of this is wrong. When it says not in the imaginary scenes they portray, no, the imaginary scenes they portray were part of their awesomeness. That was part of what made them good. So the not here kills this answer, and that is wrong. Okay, so the answer is B. Questions on this question? Okay, I know I'm reading this out loud and that slows things down, but do you see how these answer choices can be eliminated without reading them entirely? That's where you want to get, right? And you can be confident that you're getting rid of them for good reasons. All right. Let's go to the next one. So question 9. Question 9, the author mentions the props employed in the passing of Arthur. Oh, hey, this is interesting. It's asking us why the author mentioned props, and the passing of Arthur was the example. So we already know that the example was being used to prove that these pictures are both amateuristic and artistic, right? Remember that? So why did the author mention the props? Well, the author was mentioning the props to show the amateur side of these photos, right? Or at least of that photo. So that's, I can predict the answer before even reading the answer choices, right? Answer choice A says examples of amateurish aspects of the work. Yeah, the props, what were they? Broomsticks were the amateur side of the work. That's got to be the answer. B, evidence of the transformative power of theater. What? No, we were talking specifically about Cameron's work and why it had these two characteristics. C, testimonies testimonies. I just want to stop there. Okay. Well, I guess testimonies could mean like evidence. So evidence to Cameron's ingenuity? No, it was to Cameron's amateurness, right? D, indications that the work is intended ironically. No, Cameron intended, if you recognize the main point, you would know that Cameron didn't try to do this, but made mistakes, right? E, support for a negative appraisal. No. The author likes this. The author was not trying to support a negative appraisal of the work. So the answer is definitely A. Questions on this question? Even though I said it's definitely A, if you're confused, tell me. Like I mean, maybe it's not definite. Okay.
I chose C. First, so I've done this passage like a long time ago. And when I did that for the first time, I chose C because the sentence before it said that it's a combination of amateurism and artistry. So I thought that, Cameron is ingenious in using simple props to demonstrate artistic scene, like to achieve an artistic effect. So that's why.
So yeah, one thing, I mean, the author doesn't talk about the ingeniousness of Cameron, right? If anything, there's this kind of idea that Cameron failed. Cameron was trying to do one thing and didn't succeed at it. And so if these paintings are great, which the author does think they're great because of these unintended consequences, right? And so that kind of kills the ingenuity. Also, ingenuity is coming from what you're kind of guessing, you're inferring from the fact that these things were brought together, that it was ingenious. But although the author says it's great, we really have to look back at the sentence before the example and say, okay, what was the author trying to prove? And just leave it at that, right? The author was trying to prove that the pictures have amateurism and artistry, and that's it. And we don't want to go further. Like, it's almost like you put those two together and you're like, oh, so that means she's ingenious. And it's like, no, going beyond the passage.
Okay. So I need to stay more on the surface and just interpret it more literally.
Yes. What was the passage saying? End of story, right?
Okay.
I mean, we are, of course, engaging with the passage and trying to figure out what the author's trying to say, but we don't want to inject more meaning in it than is there.
Okay. Yeah. Understood.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go to question 10. Which one of following, if true, would most help to explain the claim about suspension of disbelief? Okay, I kind of remember this claim, but I'll look at it again. When we look at a narrative painting, we can suspend our disbelief. When we look at a narrative photograph, we cannot. Okay, so when you look at a painting, you can actually believe you're looking at, I keep thinking of Jesus because I'm imagining that baby, but whatever. You can imagine that you're actually looking at the baby Jesus. When you look at one of her narrative photographs, you're like, that ain't, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but that's not Jesus. That's Uncle Joe's baby, and Joe's baby's upset. And anyways, so what would help to explain that claim? Well, I just tried to explain it. So let's see if there's some answer that's related to it. A, sitting for a painting typically takes much longer than sitting for a photograph. If that were true, then the painting might look less real than the photograph. Well, maybe that is true. But photographs or paintings still look better. Because painters can do whatever they want, I guess. Paintings, unlike photographs, can depict obviously impossible situations. Well, yes, they can, but if a painting did depict an obviously impossible situation, if it was obvious that it was impossible, then it would be harder to suspend your disbelief, not easier, right? Like you'd be like, what the hell is that tree floating in the sky for? That's fake, right? It's not because paintings can do this. It's because they haven't done that, right? They've tried to create the situation as realistic as close to what it was actually like. So then we start to believe that the painting is a painting of baby Jesus or Shakespeare or whatever, right? Okay, so B is wrong because of the obviously impossible. C, all of the sitters for a painting do not have to be present at the same time. Okay, so their presence together makes it more or less believable. I don't see how that helps. D, a painter can suppress details about a sitter that are at odds with an imaginary persona. Yeah, so for example, if the sitter is upset, the painter can still paint a smile on their face, right? And make it look like what you would expect. And therefore you don't get distracted by the angry looking baby. I think that's why paintings look more believable. E, paintings typically bear the stylistic imprint of an artist, school, or period. So what? I'm sure photographs do too on some level. Okay. Anyways, questions about that?
Oh, just a comment. There is a clue for answer choice D.
Okay.
It's like the sentence that comes after, immediately after, says we are always aware of the photograph's doubleness of each figure's imaginary and real personas. So
yes,
that kind of resonates with D that talks about it like persona.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, okay. So I would, that's interesting that you bring that up because I actually didn't remember that sentence, but I remembered what I thought of this claim, right? And it's nice to see this textual support for D. But I would say more often I get support for my answers from my understanding of the main point as opposed to specific words. The problem with specific words is a lot of times the wrong answers will throw them in there too, right? So if you rely like too robotically on individual words, you can get sidetracked. You're like, oh, well, that word was in this passage and that, therefore, hey, persona must be the answer. That worked out great here, but that could also show up in a wrong answer, right? What's more important is the underlying idea. And I probably got that idea from the passage. I just don't specifically remember that sentence. I don't want to suggest that you don't look at the passage. Textual support for the answers is 100% great. So I just want to point out that I actually forgot about that sentence, but you don't need to remember every sentence to be very confident in the answer because you remember the ideas that came out of the passage. That's all. And that can make you go faster too, because you're just like, yeah, that's consistent with what the passage was saying, even though you don't remember exactly where it was said.
Yeah, it also takes longer to find that word in the passage.
Yes, it can take time, right? If you are not confident in what was said and you're constantly looking for textual support, that is a huge time suck, right? Because you're constantly having to go back and like, okay, well, was there support for this? And it's like, okay, yeah, there is going to be, it's got to be somewhere, but that itself can be time consuming. Cool. Okay. Question 11. Based on the passage, Cameron is most like which one of the following in relation to her fancy subject pictures? Well, Cameron, to me, seems like someone who tried to create some really nice art, but kind of failed. And that's what makes the art great now, but I don't think Cameron intended that, right? At the beginning of the passage, well, actually near the end of the first paragraph, it says, if Cameron had succeeded in her project, her work would have been shit. And so to me, that's like, okay, Cameron didn't know what she was doing. And she didn't intend it to be the way it is. Okay. Anyways, so what situation is most similar to that? A playwright who introduces incongruous, man, I suck at pronouncing things, incongruous elements to preserve an aesthetic distance between characters and audience. I don't like this because it sounds intentional. I don't think Cameron intended to make these silly comical situations. B, a rap artist whose lyrics are designed to subvert the, okay, I'm done. Again, not intentional, right? The B and A are the opposite of what I'm looking for. C, a sculptor whose work possesses a certain grandeur, even though they are clearly constructed out of ordinary objects. This one doesn't talk about intent, but it is consistent with Cameron. The author thinks that her photos are wonderful, even though they had broomsticks. So I'm going to keep this answer open. D, an architect whose buildings are designed. I don't like the intentionality there. I guess I shouldn't rule that out right away. Maybe the intentionality is to be awesome, but then you end up making mistakes. But here it says designed to be as functional as possible. No. E, a film director who employs ordinary people as actors in order to give the appearance of a documentary. The ordinary people part is good, but the reason the film director did it was to make it look like a documentary. Like the film director used regular people because the film director wanted regular people, right? Wanted it to look like regular people. Cameron used regular people because she wanted them to look like baby Jesus, but failed. Sorry, I think that's funny. But in any case, E is wrong because the film director is actually trying to do something in a kind of rational way, successful way. So the answer is C. Questions on this one? All right. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. Question 12. I hope, I guess I'm not taking a lot of time to say this, but I hope you're starting to see how some of these questions, even though they aren't specifically about the main point, your understanding of the main point makes them a lot easier. Let's try this next one. Okay, question 12. Based on the passage, the author would agree with each of the following statements except. Okay, so the author is going to agree with a lot of things. I think I know what the author thinks. The author likes these photos for various reasons. That makes sense to me. So these should be easy. A less realistic medium can be more conducive to suspension of disbelief than a more realistic medium. Yeah, painting can make it easier to believe than photography. Yeah, because the realistic medium makes it hard for you to suspend your disbelief. I would say the author agrees with that. That is wrong. B, amateurness is a positive quality in some works of art. Yeah, these photographs have amateurness. C, what might appear to be incongruity in a narrative photograph can actually enhance its aesthetic value. Yes, the author likes the fact that the incongruity is the broomstick with the with the amazing background or the amazing scene that's trying to be depicted, that can enhance its value. The author thinks it can. So the author agrees with this. This is wrong. D, we are sometimes aware of both the real and the imaginary persona of an actor in a drama. Yeah, we clearly are sometimes aware of both. We see the person as the baby Jesus and as Uncle Joe's baby. All right, answer choice E, a work of art succeeds only to the extent that it realizes the artist's intentions. Again, going back to some message that was conveyed at some point in the passage, I think near the beginning, Cameron did not intend to do these silly things. So a work of art does not succeed only to the extent that the author's intentions are realized. In fact, it succeeded here because the author's intentions were not realized. That is the answer. That is not something that the author would agree with. Questions? We're okay? Okay, yell at me if this doesn't make sense. Okay, Cameron has a question. Can you speak more on the strength of these answers as well? I found that when doing agree, disagree questions, things as restrictive as succeeds only or always are giveaways. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's much easier for me to agree that some of my friends or some of your friends are nice than to agree with the claim that all of your friends are nice. Right? I'm not trying to get personal here. I'm just saying, like, if you came to me and you said every single one of my friends is nice, I'd be like, okay. I mean, maybe you don't have a lot of friends, or maybe you do have a lot of friends and they're all nice, but that's rare. Usually there's one jerk, right, in the world, even amongst our friends. So things like all or only are things that are harder for people to agree with. That said, I wouldn't have that be the focus as you go through these questions, because I've seen people too, they will read answer choices that say things like amateurishness is a positive quality in some works of art. They see the word some and they're like, oh yeah, weak answer, must be easy to agree with, must be wrong. And it's like, okay, yeah, but there was some other word in there that made it right. So I think you should be sensitive to these words and understand what they mean, but that's it, right? You really want to look for the answer that you're like, yeah, the author disagrees with that substantively. These words make that easier to happen, but they aren't the linchpin, right? Okay, cool. Next question, question 13. The passage provides the most support for inferring that in Cameron's era, what do we know about Cameron's era? The only thing I really got from this passage is that people took photographs. They took a long time to take photographs. People were upset. People took bad photographs. Remember, there was that really bad photograph. Oh, there were also masterpieces, at least when it came to paintings, but I don't know about masterpieces of photography. I don't know if there were any. I mean, this author liked these photos, but anyways, answer choice A, there was little interest in the photographs documenting contemporary life. I actually don't know that. We know that Cameron focused on like these fancy subjects, but what did other photographers, even that Oscar guy, what did they focus on? I have no clue. So I can't say what was true generally or whether people were interested in contemporary life or not. B, photography was practiced mainly by wealthy amateurs. Was Cameron wealthy? I have no clue. C, publicity stills of actors were coming into vogue. again, I don't know what was popular or not popular. I know that this guy, the author now, liked these photographs, but what happened then? D, there were no professional artists models. No, sorry, there were no professional artists models. Cameron used regular folk, but there certainly could have been professional artists models in other photographs or other paintings. I have no clue. E, the time required to take a picture was substantial. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is one of the things I did know, because the baby was mad. They said something about like enduring the ordeal. Do you guys remember that? I don't remember where it was, but something about like suffering through this, right? So clearly it took time to take a picture, or at least it did for Cameron. So it took time for some people and probably everybody. That's the answer. Questions on this one? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Question 14. The discussion of suspension of disbelief in the second paragraph serves which one of the following purposes? Why did the author talk about disbelief? Well, the author talked about disbelief. This is my prediction, because we can disbelieve. Oh, we disbelieve the photographs, but we don't necessarily disbelieve the paintings. There's something about the photograph that we have to just accept as true. We can't let that go. Okay. A, it is the main conclusion of the passage. No. You guys cool? I'm not going to read the rest of that. It's not the main point of the passage. The disbelief thing is not the main point of the passage. B, it introduces a contrast the author uses in characterizing the peculiar nature of our response to Cameron's fancy subject pictures. Yeah, there's this contrast between paintings and photography, and that does seem to have something to do with how we respond to her photos. It's a little vague. I'll just keep that open for now. C, it is the key step in an argument supporting the author's negative appraisal. Done. Oh wait, negative appraisal of what? Yeah, of photography? No, the author liked the photography. This is out. D, it is used to explain a criticism of Cameron's fancy subject pictures. You know, we did hear about people who didn't like her work, but it was very muted. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion. This isn't used to expand upon or explain a criticism. So this is out. E, it draws a contrast between narrative painting and drama. No, it draws a contrast between narrative painting and narrative photography. Wrong. I'm done. So B is a little vague, but it kind of makes sense. The author is trying to help us understand how we interact with Cameron's photos, because we can't suspend disbelief. We have to see what is also happening at the same time with these silly characters, right? Okay, Davis, question.
Yes, I'm sorry. This is for number 13. I was just curious. I picked the answer D, and I did because it didn't mention it explicitly in the passage. So I just thought if it doesn't mention it explicitly, then it must be the answer. So when you're looking for options like that, like how do you balance it's not explicitly mentioned versus sort of bringing outside information?
Well, if something is not explicitly mentioned, then we don't know anything about it, right? So like today in class, I have not talked about, trees. Oh, I did talk about trees, actually. I haven't talked about Teslas, right? So because I never mentioned Teslas, does that mean that there are no Teslas in the world? Right? The reality is we just don't know anything about Teslas based on our conversation today. So they could exist, they might not exist, there might be a lot of them, they might be very few of them. I don't know, right? So same here. They never talked about professional artist models. So it's like, I don't know. Do they exist? Do they not exist? Are they everywhere? Are they nowhere? Unknown. Cool. So back to 14. No, I guess no questions on this one. We're good. Okay. Last question. Okay, and this Misty, you have a Tesla. That's nice to know. I'm glad you like it too. Question 15, the main purpose of the passage. Okay, well, this clearly is going to tie into the main point. What was the main point? The main point was that that Cameron's paint photos are great. Why are they great? Because they're kind of silly and artistic at the same time. And the main purpose of the passage is to convince me of that. That's the main purpose of the passage, right? That's my prediction. A, to chronicle Cameron's artistic development. Okay, if you're going to chronicle something, that means you're going to lay out how things changed over time. Didn't happen. I am definitely not reading all of this answer. If you did, you wasted your time. B, to argue that the tension between Cameron's aims and the results she achieved in some of her works enhances the work's aesthetic value. Okay, tension is kind of an odd word, but there was tension, or there was conflict or incongruity between what Cameron was trying to do and what she actually ended up doing. And that does seem to have increased the work's aesthetic value. It's not exactly what I described, so I'm just going to keep that open for now. C, to show that Cameron's essentially theatrical vision accounts for both the strengths and the weaknesses of her photographic, what is that? Oeuvre? That's my guess. I think that means her photographic like body of work, but okay, sorry for the distraction. Did anyone else know how to say that word? Oeuvre or something like that? Whatever. The LSAT being annoying. What is it? Okay, I'm not gonna try to say that. Cool. Anyways, her theatrical vision isn't what accounts for the strengths and the weaknesses. It's her theatrical vision, if she even has one, and her mess ups that account for her I guess her success. So this is not right. We need something in here about the mistakes as well. At the very least, this was not the main point of the passage. Oh, her vision is what accounts for the mistakes. No, she had a vision, and despite that vision had mistakes. Anyways, D, to explain why Cameron's project of acquiring for photography the prestige. I didn't know she was attempting to acquire prestige for what? For photography? That's wrong. E, to defend Cameron's masterpiece, The Passing of Arthur. That's too specific. The passage was to defend or to promote Cameron's work, not her individual masterpiece. Was that even a masterpiece? It just said The Passing of Arthur. I don't think it described it as a masterpiece. So wrong. That leaves me only answer choice B, which at least didn't have anything wrong with it. So that is the answer. Questions on that question?
Can you just repeat your thought process, or like how did you figure out that? How did you figure out the intention versus the result of Cameron? Like, because I thought I couldn't tell that whether Cameron was intentionally or unintentionally using like ordinary people as sitters. Like, I thought that she created the comical effect on purpose.
Oh,
like, yeah.
I don't think so, because so we talk about the comedy at the very, very beginning, right? Like that's where we learn about these comical conditions. And then at the end of that first paragraph, it says, if Cameron had succeeded in her project of making seamless works of art, her work would be essentially garbage. So what that says to me, and we know that the work isn't garbage, according to this author, right? The author thinks this work is great. Why? Precisely because she did not succeed. And so when I read that, it's like, oh, Cameron was trying to do one thing and she did something else. And I mean, the author didn't elaborate on more than that, but I get the sense that Cameron was really trying to like make some fancy pictures. She was like, yeah, I'm going to create some masterpieces here. And that's not what happened, but that's actually precisely, at least according to the author, why they're good. Are you cool with that last sentence? I think that's the clincher right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry we went over. We won't have time to do the logical reasoning, but I will stay here and answer any other questions you have about this passage, about reading comp in general, or about the LSAT in general. Of course, it's been an hour and a half. If you want to take off, I totally understand. But what questions do we have about this passage, if any, still? Does anyone still have questions about the passage? You can yell at me.
It's really difficult for an ESL, like for a English not as first language student.
Yeah.
The language is really obscure. And I have a question about, so the sentence before that if Cameron had succeeded.
Yeah.
It says, in Raphael and Giotto, there are no infant Christs whose faces are blurred because they moved. So is that sentence saying, because the sentence is not directly saying that in Cameron's photos, the faces are blurred, or the babies.
No, yeah, you're right. Like literally, it doesn't say that.
Yeah.
But it's strongly implied because, what did it say? It's the sentence before that is like, hey, these photographs are more like family albums than like Western masterpieces. For example, in Raphael and Giotto, there are no infant Christ whose faces are blurred. It's like, okay, yeah, no shit. There's none of that in those paintings. The strong implication is that they are those things, or there are those things in Cameron's photos. Otherwise, why mention it, right? Like, yeah. So you're right. Literally, it's not said, but that's strongly implied. Chris.
Okay, I noticed that this is a passage 2.
Yeah.
And do these get progressively more difficult? So would this be just a little less difficult than 3 and so on and so forth?
Yeah, it generally they get harder as you go along, but it's random. Sometimes you can have like an easy passage, the hardest passage, and then sort of medium passages. So you just don't know. Yeah. This is for whatever reason a level 3. Noriko.
Yes, I have a general question, not particularly, well, what kind of relates to this passage. So I tried this passage before and I still got a lot of questions wrong today. So obviously, I think I'm not reviewing good enough.
Yeah.
After listening to your explanation, I feel like I understand, but what's the best approach to review reading comprehension like this, especially the one that I got a lot of questions wrong?
Yeah. Well, if you got a lot of questions wrong, it strongly suggests that at the very least, you need to make sure you go back, reread the passage, and get that solid intuitive understanding of the passage that you presumably missed. I mean, you could also be misunderstanding the questions or misunderstanding the individual answer choices. That can all contribute to a wrong answer, of course. But a lot of times there are answer choices that I don't understand. Not that I couldn't understand them or take the time to understand them, but you have to remember that 80% of the answers are wrong. So when answers start to sound wrong, I tend to knock them out and not spend a lot of time reading them. So when we are getting questions wrong, it's usually because of our lack of understanding, really solid personal understanding of the passage. So how do you review? Go start with reading the passage slower and really trying to get to a point where you could look away from the passage and explain it to someone else. I'm not asking you to memorize it. Please, that's not what I'm doing here. I couldn't memorize. Like if you asked me, what does this say? I would tell you my own words, and it might be slightly out of order. It definitely would not use the same words that this wordy author uses, but it would touch on key ideas that were expressed.
Okay. So yeah, I will try again to summarize the passage in my own words, right?
Yes. And you say summarize itself can be a little bit misleading. You're really trying to get to the main point and why the author believes that main point.
Okay.
Not just because a summary, when people hear the word summary, they start to think like, okay, at first they talked about this, and then they talked about this, and then they talk. When you say, hey, this is what the author was trying to say, you start with the main point, and then you might elaborate on why the author holds that view. But the order is actually often out of order from how that information was presented in the passage.
True. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not sure how to say your name, but Junyi, how do you say your name?
Oh, hi there. Thanks. It's Junie. It's exactly how it is spelled.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thanks. I actually have two questions. And I know you addressed the timing issue at the beginning of this course, but I just wanted to ask you, for me, after some time of drilling, I was able to get -1 to -3 wrong per section for reading comprehension. But I found myself consistently going over 3 to 8 minutes to get this right answer right.
Yeah.
So would you suggest me to keep on being like doing one at a time and try to slow down to speed up, or should I do something else to speed up my reading process?
No. Yeah. Continue to slow down and speed up. Just continue to become a master of the English language. I know, I mean, that advice is not just for ESL students, but everyone, right? That's what the test is challenging us to become, is become gladiators of these words and say, yeah, they wrote it very poorly. They used big words, but I get the ideas that they're trying to convey, because most of those ideas actually aren't that deep. They're not that crazy. And so the more you can get better at translating, and that's both for ESL and non-ESL speakers, the better you can get at translating this trash into something that makes sense to you, the easier the questions are going to get and the faster they're going to get.
I see. That makes sense. And my second question is, how would you recommend students to review the reading comprehensions? Because for many times when I get a question wrong, I would go back to the passage and then I will be like, oh, I see. How could I possibly get that wrong the first time? And so I just don't feel like I learned a lot from the questions that
Yeah. Well, okay. So in the Demon, you can see which questions you got wrong without knowing or necessarily reminding yourself what answer you chose, right? So one thing you can do is, if you're going to reread the passage, you get to that point where you really understand it. You're like, okay, I didn't get the first time. I got a bunch of questions wrong, but I get it now. I get what this person's trying to say. Then go to the questions that you missed and predict the answer. Say, okay, I mean, this is what you should be doing during the test anyway, but you're doing it in practice at least as well. And you're saying, okay, what's the main purpose of the passage? Well, the main purpose of the passage was to do this. And then you look at the answer choices and you look to see how close your prediction is to one of the answers. And then, of course, you check to see if that's right or wrong. But that's really going to force you to be in a position where you are the boss, not just a reporter, right? Like a reporter is kind of like, well, yeah, D is the answer because, yeah, I can see it. I can see some textual evidence for that here. No. You predicted that answer before you even read it.
Yeah, that's a very good way to review. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Brett.
Yeah, hello. So in this passage, I didn't have a lot of difficulty with the inference question, but I tend to have difficulty with the inference ones because I have trouble figuring out how specific of an answer they want. I've done passages where the answer was literally they said it verbatim in the passage, and then other ones where it's you have to make a pretty good leap to do it. And I was wondering if there's any way to understand which kind of answer they're looking for in the question section.
Yeah, so you got to be careful there, Brett. When you said you had to make a pretty big leap to get there, it's very likely that you missed something in the passage. Maybe you looked to the wrong part, or even our explanation looked to the wrong part to justify that answer, because inference questions in reading comp are essentially, and this is true for almost all the questions, there must be true questions. And the correct answer is just going to be the restatement of something in the passage or something very, very, very close. And so if you feel like you had to leap to get there, we need to look back and figure out why you're feeling that way.
Am I misunderstanding what they mean by inference then? Am I reading that definition wrong?
Possibly. A lot of people do. A lot of people think, oh, okay, because I think in school, a lot of times infer means to take the information they gave you and then kind of like conjecture from that what might be true. The LSAT is using the term infer in its literal sense, which means to, well, I don't know if it's literal actually, because the literal, well, it doesn't matter. The point is what they mean is something that is essentially proven or proven by the passage. It's the most boring, most unsurprising claim. And so when you do find yourself stretching to get there, you're probably missing something from the passage.
So as someone who's taught this, for a long time, you would say that the way the writers of the test usually refer to it in the question is that it's something that's it's the thing that's most true as evidenced by the passage.
Absolutely. It's the most true and almost true. True in many cases and almost true in most other cases.
So just not quite explicitly stated, but as close to that as you can get without explicitly stating it.
It's going to be very, very close. Like it'd be very hard to argue against.
Okay.
If someone tried to argue against it, you'd say, yeah, but look at this sentence. I mean, how else are you going to interpret that?
Okay, cool. That answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Belle, question.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you for doing this today.
Yeah.
My question is main point versus purpose questions. I can usually get the main point question right, but I end up being tripped up on purpose questions. Like I missed 2 of the 3 purpose questions in this passage. So I know the more you do it, the better you get, and go slow to go fast. But I would like to master purpose questions.
Yeah,
since no matter what kind of passage it is, it trips me up.
Sure. What is a purpose question in your mind? What's it asking for?
I don't know. I usually just think it's a purpose question because it includes what was the purpose of whatever.
Okay, you're right that it's a purpose question. My question to you is, what is a purpose question typically asking? It's asking you to find something, right?
Right.
What is,
so It's like it's like drilling down on something. Like I'm more likely to get the purpose question right if they're like, what was the purpose of them saying this versus them, and then they say whatever, because then I can look like a for example or some other keyword, like I can focus in on a specific part of the passage. But if they're like, what was the purpose of the passage? And I've already answered the main point question, then I feel
Okay,
like,
so I think this will help you. Keep in mind, yeah, they can't ask you what's the purpose of a sentence, what's the purpose of this word, what's the purpose of the paragraph, what's the purpose of the passage. So there are, degrees to which the purpose that they can ask about. First of all, the purpose is asking why, right? Why did the author write the passage? Why did the author write the paragraph? Why did the author write the sentence? And so you're really getting into the motive behind the claim. Is the claim being there? Is it there as evidence? Is it being used to support something else? Is it a conclusion itself that is supported by something else? What's the paragraph doing? Is it providing context? What's the passage as a whole doing? If you're struggling with the passage as a whole, don't overcomplicate it. Look for the answer choice that's closest to describing the main point, because the purpose of every passage is to prove the main point.
yes, okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll try that.
No problem. LSAT.
Hi there. I have a quick question. In general on reading card.
Yeah.
I'm constantly getting wrong author's tone or attitude questions, especially when they use wide variety of adjectives like detached or ambivalence, dispassionate, and sort of others, and how to attack those questions especially.
Yeah. Are you predicting an answer on them?
Yes, in many cases. But
okay.
The use of adjective is throwing me away because I'm also an ESL applicant.
Yeah.
In many cases, I don't know the meaning.
That's
meaning of me. Yeah.
That's tough. So first of all, my prediction is going to be loose, right? It's going to be like, yeah, the author liked it or didn't like it. Which one is it, right? And then that's going to eliminate 3 of the answers in most cases, because 3 of the answers are saying that the author liked something or is positive, but I'm looking for an answer where the author didn't like it, right? So then we're down to 2, and then you're getting stuck between maybe two answers that are both negative, but it's the degree to which the author is negative and you don't understand the words. So for all of these, you have to be writing down these words after the fact and creating a glossary so that you can get more familiar with these types of descriptions. They don't always repeat, but the LSAT does repeat them to some level, right? On some level, we can anticipate these words to appear again. And then it often comes down to the degree which the author was negative or positive, right? I mean, gee, it sounds like half the problem here is just vocabulary. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'm writing down and learning it by heart, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, the vocabulary part is hard because you're going to have to, you could also look for synonyms to those words and see if you know all of those, right? Because that could expand your vocabulary before you encounter the words on the test. But I would say after that, most people struggle with the degree to which an author is negative or positive. And that's something that's going to come from the passage. Like if you're paying attention to the main point of the passage, you'll know how passionately the author feels about that issue or not.
Yeah, I got you.
Keep up the glossary. I hope that helps over time. It should. They do repeat those words eventually.
Now I started doing time sections, and I'm aiming to finish, like, to get 3 passages right, because reading comp was my strongest in all the standardized tests, even if I'm ECL applicant. So that's it.
Keep up the good work.
I just want to say something to LSAT, like, because I am also an ESL, and I actually think that being an ESL and doing reading comp, like, we have an advantage because, like, we've been doing that since day one in our English learning journey. So we are very familiar with this type of test, or like this type of questions. Like, we're used to doing reading comps, so like we should have less fear when it comes to reading comp. And also because we know that English is not our first language, it actually helps us to slow down, like, because like my native English speaker friends, like, they read super fast, like they read the passage in like 2 minutes, but we can't do that, and that is actually a good thing. Like, it's harder for the native speakers to slow down, but for us it's easier, if that makes sense, because we have to slow down. We can't finish the passage in 2 minutes, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, what is helping me a lot, also I have a law degree in Uzbekistan, so law passage is quite easy for me to grasp the meaning, and other 3, like humanities and social science, I can do pretty like quickly, but the natural science is kind of problematic still, because I did not study those subjects in English.
Yeah, so there might be more words too that you're not familiar with, right?
Yeah.
But there's also going to be words that are definitely not familiar to native speakers. They're doing that deliberately, but when they do, they will try to define them if it's necessary. So, hey, Braden, I see you have your hand up. Question.
Ben, how's it going?
Good, man.
Hey, thank you so much for hosting these free classes. I mean, you guys really are giving us a great opportunity for some great content. So I really appreciate you hosting. Quick question for you. I went from a cold diagnostic of 144. I've been studying for about a year now. I hit a plateau about 2 months ago I was stuck in the 150s for months. I mean, like 6 months, I was stuck in the 150s. 2 months ago, I broke through the 160s. These past 2 weeks, I've scored 167 and 168 on my last 2 practice tests. So I'm getting better. I'm -2 to -0 on games, and I'm -3 to 5 on logical reasoning. I cannot break -5 on reading comprehension. I just can't do it. I didn't know if you had any suggestions on where I should be maybe pointing my attention to in the next months of studying.
I'm going to turn this to Eric because Eric does a cross-training class. Eric, do you have 1 or 2 tips on pulling up reading comp when you're successful in LR and games?
Good question. The one thing that, and it's more of an attitude really, and anyone who's been to my cross-training class will be sick of hearing me say this at this point, but one of the biggest things I took away from the logic games was the understanding that there is only one answer that's definitively proven to be correct. That, you know, when you are working on a logic game question and it's a could be true question, and you're going through the answer choices and you're like, well, it looks like that could be true. It also looks like that could be true. You understand that that's not because there's like 2 answers that might be right, but one of them's better, just happens to be better than the other. It's you understand that something about your setup is incorrect. that you made a mistake with your worlds and your, see, it was easier for me to blame myself for not understanding the game and to realize, oh, I got to go redo my setup. And then when I get it right, then only one of them will look like the correct answer to what could be true. And so there's like that understanding on the games that there's only one absolutely correct answer and the rest of them are totally wrong. And that attitude, when I sort of like decided to bring that onto reading comprehension and to understand that, hey, if I'm debating two answer choices, it's not because there are two answer choices that might be good. It's because I didn't understand the passage well enough so that I'm unable to definitively eliminate the one that's not good. And kind of recognizing that, and basically the result of that is first, like, put more time in to read and understand, and then second, when you're stuck with those answer choices that you're not sure about, or if you just like get the feeling, you just kind of get that spidey sense of like, well, I'm going to pick this, but I don't feel great about it. Recognize what that means, which is that like you don't understand something, and like force yourself to take the time to think about it, or if you have to, go back to the passage. But ideally, you don't have to go back to the passage. You have learned to put in that work from the beginning. So I don't know if that's useful, but that's kind of the attitude that I bring from the games into both LR and RC. And then in terms of bringing in like LR lessons into RC, the big one that I think about is recognizing that the whole passage is just one long argument. And that just like on on logical reasoning, we can kind of be assholes and say to the person who's the author, tell them, hey, this argument's no good. You didn't tell me this, you didn't tell me that, or you need to tell me this. I'll do the same thing on RC passages. And it's a way of like becoming actually more interested in the passage, is to say, hey, you're trying to tell me that Cameron's photos are so great, but I don't buy it. What's your evidence for why Cameron's photos are so great? This is the kind of evidence that I need. You made this claim, but it wasn't very strong, so I need more evidence. And kind of like having that LR attitude on RC helps me to like engage better and also kind of anticipate where the author's going. So
excellent. No, thank you, Eric. That reminds me of something that I've said in the past, and I don't know why I just haven't said it more recently or just forgotten about it or something, but I just still remember when it dawned on me that the entire test is simply giving you information and asking you what must be true on the basis of that information. And it's just three different forms of doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, Nathan has an article saying, hey, look, every question in reading comp is a must be true question. But that could easily be extended to every question on the test is essentially some form of must be true. Like what was said, and now what can you deduce from that? And what can you not deduce from that? And the test is trying to see what you can figure out from what was being said. But I really like your point, Eric, about the games, because that accountability is what's going to change you from someone who is seeing two answers that are very similar to someone who's going to see two answers as being very different, like you do in the games. And there are people who are looking at that same question you got wrong and saying, no way in hell would I pick D. Why are you tempted by it? Here's why that's just flat out wrong. And you want to get there because that's true way more often than it's not true. But yeah, Braden, thoughts, reactions?
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, gonna keep drilling and keep hitting those sections.
Okay, you got it. You can do it. Brett, question.
Yeah, so I actually have the same issue as Braden with RC. Based on your last response about approaching the RC passages like you do logic games, that helps me a little bit. My question would be, once you come down to two answers that you can't decide between, is it better to focus on those two answers in terms of finding a way to prove the right one right, or finding a way to prove the wrong one wrong?
Well, in some ways, when you're in that moment, right? You do, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. So first of all, a wrong answer can be wrong because of one word. A right answer, every word has to be right. So in that sense, I do think it's easier to see why wrong answers are wrong, maybe. At the same time, when you're predicting, you should have predicted that answer or something close to it. And so when people truly are stuck between two answers, I think it's almost like too late. The problem happened
in my understanding of the passage.
Yeah. And so what do you do in that moment? Of course, we want to talk about that. Maybe go back to the question and predict an answer, then look at the two answers again. Compare the two answers, see what words are similar, because that's not going to be why one is right or one is wrong. See what words are different, and then see if that difference brings to mind something from the passage that, you know, makes you question that answer or like that answer. But if you find yourself getting into those situations more often than is ideal, right? More often than a couple times a section, then the real solution is to go back and read the passage, not then and there, but as you go forward, right? Continue to force yourself to become a master of that passage.
Okay.
So I hope that's answering your short-term question, but also your long-term question, right? Like, how do I really solve it? How do I prevent myself from getting into that situation?
You showed me where my problem is not in this, is not that I'm not understanding the question properly. My problem was in my original understanding of, I just need to understand the passage better. And if I understand the passage better, then I'll be able to point out the differences between the two answer choices and why one's wrong or why one's right.
Yeah. And the predicting. Yep. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. I know we went way over. I apologize. Thanks for staying. Thanks for asking questions. If you have any feedback, you can leave it on the syllabus page, actually. Just say what you liked or didn't like. We'll try to make it better as we go forward. Good luck and keep up all the good work. Thanks again for coming, and have a good week.
Thank you.